Hi, welcome back to Tuba People TV, where we talk about Arnold Jacobs all of the time. We're here at the University of Oregon School of Music in Eugene, where it's our pleasure to have David Fedderly here for a week-long residence. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Mike. It's my pleasure to be here, actually.
Well, we're happy to hear that. Puddles welcomes you also. He's been enjoying watching you teach. He's very impressed. David Fedderly, in case you don't know, is the principal tubist of the Baltimore Symphony since 1983. And really, I think one of Mr. Jacobs' leading students as performer, but also as a teacher. And it's really been wonderful having you here for the week, seeing you teach in various disciplines. We had a master class today for voice students, master class for woodwind students. We had a student forum where you worked with a violinist, a saxophonist. So it's an amazing set of pedagogical forces that you bring to any particular room. So we thank you for being here and for doing that.
Well, thank you.
I'm wondering if you can tell me if there's a big picture item that you learned from Jake. What would that be? Just thinking broadly.
Well, I think the big picture was being an artist first. And I think that's why he could teach all the different instruments and the singers and everything, because it was always about the art form, and how we approached that. I know we watched a video of him talking about how he could teach piccolo trumpet, and he said there's a set of challenges and a set of things that you have to be able to do, but it runs the same as trumpet. They're just a little bit different. So I think the whole focus is on musicianship, and as we go for the right sound and the right style, we start doing everything physically correct, which was, of course, his whole thing. It's about music, and then the physical works. It's not if you get everything right physically, it'll be musical. That's not the case.
So it's more as you manage the music, then you'll end up managing the meat.
Exactly. I mean, it was always. He would talk about not going in the practice room to practice your instrument, but going in the practice room to practice music. And as you learned music, you learned to play your instrument. And that's where most of us fail unless we are forced to think this other way. We're thinking meat, we're thinking motor, we're thinking, how do I do this, how do I do this? And we're trying to feel everything instead of telling the body what to do.
That seems to be such an amazing new fact for so many people, and something certainly I have to be reminded. And this week, having you here has just been reminded over and over and over again. So it's really helped to rejuvenate my own set of pedagogical and performing batteries. But I'm wondering, just in terms of walking into a room and encountering, it could be a brass player, it could be a woodwind player, it could be a singer, it could be a string player. What got you to that point in terms of being able to walk into a room and be very comfortable in teaching in those various situations?
Well, part of it's just been experience. I've been doing this now. I've started private teaching in 1973. And so I've been doing it a long time. I think you have to walk in, and as a teacher, you have to be able to diagnose what the problems are. And it really doesn't matter whether it is a singer or a string player or a wind player or anything else. The ideas of sound and sound production are really all the same. There's not much difference between, say, the singer, other than they use the larynx, the vocal cords, but the brass player uses these. Mm-hmm. We use these as vocal cords. And you have to trust that your ears, you'll hear what it is. It really comes from a problem of, it's almost negative, but what is it why wouldn't I pass this person on in an audition? And I think that's what Jake always heard. And so what do I do to get them to that next step? Mm-hmm. And so we all have something we fail at. I don't, if I took a lesson right now, if I could take one with Mr. Jacobs, I'm sure he would find a lot of things wrong. Mm-hmm. So there's always something to talk about. There's always something to try to improve. And so we go about that. And it's usually something, it can be mechanical, but most of the time, and I maybe have to show them with a decibel meter like I did the singer today. And very quickly then they'll change, and then they sense what it feels like. But so many people want to know what it feels like, but I do it all through sound and what I see them doing, that diagnosis. But the challenge has to be one of a musical challenge, and then they'll meet that. It becomes very easy when they do that. So I think that that's the thing. I walk in and then I simply hear and then I respond. And I think that's what Mr. Jacobs did. You respond to what it is you're hearing. You don't go in with some preconceived idea of what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. I never know what's going to happen when I walk in those rooms, but you have to trust. And after teaching as long as I have, I think you begin to trust that. And certainly Mr. Jacobs had that too. Yeah. That you begin to trust that you can handle those situations. It's very similar to going on stage and playing a difficult piece, but knowing that you've done it long enough that you're going to be able to really succeed at that.
When did you first encounter Mr. Jacobs?
I was 18 and I came to Northwestern University, and he was the teacher. And so he was really my first tuba teacher, true tuba teacher. Mm-hmm. And I started studying in 1972. And actually, my last lesson was probably the last year that he was alive. So I still was on the phone constantly with him. I would come and see him if I was back in Chicago for lessons. I flew back several times just to take lessons. Mm-hmm. So it was a relationship that continued all those years.
That's great. Can you talk about any of the changes or evolution that you observed in Mr. Jacobs' teaching?
Well, I think there's two changes. I think I know several students of his from in the early 50s, and then in the 60s, and then myself, and then some of the students that came afterwards. And I also used to go back oftentimes to watch the week that he taught at Northwestern. Mm-hmm. So I was able to see his teaching later on in life. And then there was the change, if we want to talk just the change on my own. Of course, I came and there were tremendous amounts of things lacking in my playing. I had every problem imaginable. And so we methodically had to work through that. And there were 4 years of fundamentals and etudes, never an excerpt. And then only once I got in civic did we get to the excerpts. And so there was a lot of talk, physiology at the beginning, some embouchure talk. A lot of people didn't realize Mr. Jacobs truly dealt simply straight on talking about embouchure. But he did. He certainly did with me. There was more and more of the music. I mean, there was always the artist first, but there were a lot of mechanics we had to talk about. And then as I got better as a player, there was less of the mechanics and more of the actual straight-on musician. But what was interesting to me is how he evolved as a teacher. In fact, when I was in Chicago, it was wind and song. Mm. And so when Brian sent me the diskette of all the information, and then when he was going to write the book, I said, look, you've got to get the name right. And he said, no, he changed that after you left. So what I see in the people that studied in the 50s and then the 60s and then myself was an evolution of his first studies were in physiology. And so both the 50s and 60s, a lot of his students talked about lessons for science. And he was working with them with the machines and everything else, and it was very technically oriented. Yeah. But as he even talks about it himself in interviews, he realized very quickly that that was just a small part. But there was about a 20-year period where there was a tremendous amount of looking into the technical, simply the physiology, using the gauges, using all the other things. Then by the time I got there, he had already shifted very much to the product. And when you want hearing it as a great artist, as an art form, that would fix all of this other stuff. But I think that 20 years or so helped him truly be able to diagnose and understand what your problems were. And then he knew if there was a secret to his teaching, I've always said that he knew what exercise to assign you to take care of a specific problem.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't say, you have this problem, because he knew that created a problem for you for the rest of your life. He'd just say, I need you to do this, and you play it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons I can teach the way I do, is because I don't know, others probably did it, but I always questioned after I left the lessons, what were we working on? And what exercises was he giving me and asking me to do? And it just made sense to me, so that guided my practice the next week. So
Mm-hmm.
I was very aware of what he was trying to fix with each of the different types of exercises, and it was very easy to fix because I just played the exercise. So I think that was a change from what he had done before. But it only allowed him to get there after those 20 years of really understanding physiology to such a degree that he did, to now be able to say, okay, now I can fix these problems by doing this musically.
Right.
And so I think as he went on, it became more and more of that. He got better and better and better at it, is how I sense it. And even very late after I'd left town and came back for the Northwestern, it was an amazing thing how he could motivate players that weren't maybe the greatest players, but he would motivate them. But how he could really go after a player he thought had talent and really push them hard, like he did us in lessons. But if he sensed that, he sensed talent, and he sensed it became a lot higher pressure.
Mm-hmm. And you were there, you studied with him from 72, consecutively, 72 to 82. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
even now we're still, in a way, studying with him.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did he talk much about his research from University of Chicago Medical School and we were bringing Herseth and Farkas and Crisafulli and himself into the labs, or maybe it wasn't Crisafulli, it was Lambert. Probably it was
Probably
Lambert. Yeah.
He talked a little bit about it. He would that was kind of how he backed up his anything he said. This is from the research that we did.
Mm-hmm.
I also went down to Michael Reese one time when he spoke to the doctors there. There was a big lecture he gave down there, and I was down there with him on that one. And it was amazing to just his knowledge. I always joke it took me 6 months before I realized he even spoke English, with protractors, retractors, orbicularosaurus, and all of these different things, and pulmonary function, and all of this stuff. It was like, huh? I was just from Minnesota. I just tried to play
a tuba player.
I just tried to play the tuba,
Yeah.
And so it was amazing, and it was amazing to see. That's when he really pulled out the knowledge base with them, and to see the reaction of the doctors, because it was obvious he knew exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah, I some people, sort of discussion that we would have after lessons sometimes up at Regenstein, Charlie Schuckett and myself and others, was if it was a technical, was he using all that technical language just to get us to go so numb that we would just be dumb and play, or was there a combination of really trying to get us educated in those things? What do you think about that?
He once said to me, if you get a job, you're going to teach. If you don't get a job playing, you're going to teach. So you have to learn how to teach. And so I think that there was a very strong element of the educator in him, not just for us as players, but just also for us to continue his legacy, which many of us have done. I mean, there's many, many of us, and on many different instruments, to be able to help continue his work through what we did. And so I think there was absolutely a desire to teach us these things and for us to learn them so that we could pass it on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it certainly has been very helpful to be able to speak in those terms, although I don't think that my knowledge is nearly as deep as yours on the subject, but it is very helpful to be able to have a reason why, even though we don't need to know it all to play. Just
to play, we don't need to know anything.
Yeah, he'd say, now forget all. He'd speak in these very technical terms, and then he'd say, now forget about all that. Just play.
Yeah.
Dave, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about playing next to Mr. Jacobs. I know that during your many years as a substitute or a substitute principal performer, there were times when you actually played second tuba next to Jake. What was that like?
Yes, the first time I played with Chicago, I played Belshazzar's Feast. There's 3 tubas. So that was the very first time. We were way off to the front at Ravinia, but it was amazing, to say the least. The next time I played, we recorded Shostakovich Fourth with Previn. There were a lot of Zarathustras. There was a Unitel broadcast of that, TV, and also a lot of Symphony Fantastiques, Berlioz's Requiem. Those are what come to mind. What I always talk about is the amazing lessons. They were week-long lessons to sit next to him and just see what he did the beginning of his day to get ready to go, what he did in the rehearsals, what he did in the concerts, how he sounded. The other part of the lesson, which I found very interesting, was observing his interaction with his colleagues. It taught me a tremendous amount. There was one situation that I remember happening that if that had happened to me, I probably would have exploded at the person that came up there and told me what to do. But he just said, "Okay, that's fine," and then just played it exactly the same way. And that person later told him how much better he sounded, and it was exactly the way he had played it before. Mm-hmm. And so it was an amazing combination of how to act, how to be a good colleague, how to be a team player. All of these things, and we knew him as this amazing personality, very powerful for us and all of this stuff. But around the orchestra, he was a very quiet man. He did his job like all the rest, and you never got the sense when he played he was the star. But with interactions with other players, he was never the star. The other thing that I found very interesting was he might comment to me, "Do you hear the problems over in this other player?" But he would never go talk to the player or say, "Hey, I hear this happening with your playing." If he was asked by a player, he would help that player. If he wasn't asked for his help, he never said anything. Mm-hmm. And so there was, like I said, there were the musical lessons. How do I have to sound? How do I have to play? There were the lessons of how you handle yourself within the orchestra so that you are somebody that the person sitting next to you can stand for 30 years. We see a lot of that in orchestras where there's fights between people who sit next to each other. And he really taught you not just the musical part, but the personality part. And I feel very, very fortunate to have been able to get all of that from him. I mean, it was just this, like I said, it was a week-long lesson every time I got to play with him from every single way and how he treated me and everything else. So I was very lucky.
That's great. Very insightful. Thanks. Well, as you can see, there's magically appeared a music stand with some music on it. And we brought it here because I want to ask Dave if you could just show us a little bit about, maybe first discuss a little bit about the Marcel Tabuteau phrasing system that Jake taught in lessons.
Sure. A way that Mr. Jacobs would get his students to play more musically, and it's most of us think phrase. When we were young players, especially tuba players, it was boom, 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 boom. Major solo was boom, 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 boom. But he had to teach us how to think more musically. And Marcel Tabuteau, being principal oboe of Philadelphia Orchestra, taught a course called musicianship at Curtis, and every single player had to take that course. Didn't matter whether you played tuba or oboe, didn't matter. You took that course. He used a couple of different number systems. He used a number system 0 to 10 in sound. So let's hear you play a 3. The tuba plays a 3, but the oboe is going to have to play a 5 dynamic to be balanced. And so he talked about numbers a lot. He used to call what he referred to, I think, as Tabuteau referred to as the dancing phrase. And that was that Mr. Jacobs called it sub-phrasing. Some people call it micro-phrasing. I know there's a lot of teachers who teach it. So what Mr. Jacobs did is showed me groupings of instruments or of notes, and said concentrate on those, and as we play, we feel like we're playing notey, but the audience hears phrase. A lot of times when we feel like we're phrasing, we're pushing forward, and we're really not playing each syllable, as he would say. By doing this, now we're saying each syllable, which creates a word, which then creates sentences, which then creates paragraphs, and the full work. And so I think what we're going to do, and he showed me this, and I tried to get more involved with, I asked him if he could give me more specifics of it. And he really said, no, there really weren't a lot of specifics about it. There's some rules, and what I gathered, and I've taken this, I realized what a huge thing it was for me, how much it improved my playing. And so it's certainly been something I've done my whole life since he showed me, and also certainly something that I teach. And the results are usually pretty stunning in master classes and with students in a private setting.
I would have to agree. Having watched it all week, it is very stunning.
And so a subphrase can be one note. A lot of times it's only 2 notes. Sometimes it's 3 notes, and once in a while 4. But generally it's 1 or 2. And what I gathered from it was always that in a case, say, of Meistersinger solo.
I'm just going to step out and we'll zoom in here.
In the Meistersinger solo, what we would do is the first phrase or subphrase would simply be 1 note. And the next phrase would be 1 note. And then the third subphrase would be 2 notes. Now what we can do after that, and I'll explain why I'm doing this, you can think of the next subphrase as 4 notes or 2 notes. And what I would suggest is that people try it thinking it both ways. Either you think this, or you can think this, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1. So it's ta, 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 ta. You could think ta, 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 ta. So it comes out, if we're singing that way, ta, 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 ta. If we want to do the 4, which is how I tend to think about it, ta, 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 and then 2 notes, ta, 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 1 note, ta, 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 ta. We're running out of red ink. Ta, 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 ta. Now, what you'll begin to notice here on the way we're dividing this, something like this is a good solid all by itself subphrase. Again, we're on the beat. It's a single phrase. A lot of players will go ta, 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 ta. They feel like they're leading or playing phrase. But you'll notice just from what I sang that it's not nearly as effective. It's more like we're talking like this instead of actually talking like this and making sure everything is very specific. Most of the time, a lot of players think that this note, that the 8th note here, is the tag on the dotted quarter. But in the Tabuteau system, I think that it always is the pickup note to here. Ta, if you're thinking of it as the tag, you have ta, 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 rather than ta, 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 ta. So it leads you, and it leads the listener. So we're generally looking for syncopations, and those become the pickups. Again, beat here, now all of a sudden we're on the and. Ta, 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 ta. And then 2 notes, ta, 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 ta. So we begin to group like that. And the trick, I think, truly is, like he said, to tape yourself, to practice it, and play it many, many different ways. Students today, I think, are always trying to play it the same way over and over and over. And I always joke in classes that, and of course that was what Mr. Jacobs worked on, was that can you take one thing and play it 10 different ways? Mm-hmm. So if it's short, you play it long. If it's long, you play it short. something like Meistersinger, you might even play jazz. Ta da ba da da ba ba da ba ba ba. Completely change it so that you create a lot of different types of music. But most players today keep playing it over and over, and I always joke that, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, and they all go, yeah, that's insanity. I said, so how insane are you driving yourself in practice day after day doing exactly the same thing? So we move things around and create variation. But this is what he was doing, small groupings like this, always pickups. That syncopation is the pickup to the next beat, not the tag. This is not the note here is not a tag on the G. The E is the pickups into that next bar. So a lot of times we're thinking over bar lines, so that it actually again becomes much more of artistry. How would we do? I guess I think what we would have here is, because Meistersinger, the solo is pretty much then the same way through. If we get to here, we've got one note. Bum. Now, if you've done 3 like I have, da 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 da, da 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 da, and pickups are always brought out, so it influences the phrase. I think it enhances. And anytime you're starting pickups, or basically starting that new subphrase, you can breathe. And as long as you breathe and you come back in strong, it actually enhances phrase rather than takes away from phrase. A lot of players also, what you'll want to do then, if you're going to take your breath there, shorten this note, make sure you're back in on time on this. No one will notice that you shorten this note slightly, but they'll notice if you hold out too long, take a breath and come in late on the beat. So that was another way, I think, and it controls the air. It controls the air, it controls your rhythm, it controls the music. So it does all sorts of things for you.
Dave, we put you in several different rooms, several different settings with a variety of musicians during your week here. Singers, string players, woodwind players, brass players. And one of the consistent themes that you brought out was just projecting tone. I'm wondering if you can address that here.
Sure. And of course, this is Mr. Jacobs again. Everything I teach is really based upon what I learned from him, and if it not completely, some of it's what I've taken and where I've gone with it, but it's certainly Mr. Jacobs. One of the big surprising things to me when I was 18 and started studying with him is he took my tuba and he said, play it like this. And I think we were talking about tonguing. He said, play it like this. And I heard him play, and I didn't think it was a very good sound. Of course, I was 18. And I thought I knew everything, and I realized very quickly I really didn't know much of anything. And this guy knew a whole lot. But he gave me my tuba back, and we had been talking about tonguing, so I thought I understood what he was saying to me. And I did what I thought he wanted. And he grabbed my tuba back, and he says, no, play it like this. He played it exactly the same way. And the sound was not what I thought it should be. It was like, wow. In fact, quite frankly, it sounded pretty bad to me. And so, but I listened to him and I thought, okay, I think I hear what he was talking about with the tonguing. And he grabs my tuba back from me. He says, no, play it like this. And he played it exactly like that with that, what I thought was bad sound. And I got a little huffy in my own head. Of course, I didn't say anything. I took the tuba back and I played it exactly the way I thought he did, just horrible sound. And all of a sudden his hand came on my knee and says, that's it. And he liked me. So I knew he wasn't trying to mess with me. And what I realized very quickly, I had noticed my senior year in high school, I played with the Duluth Symphony. And we had some really great soloists come in. Itzhak Perlman came in, Misha Dichter came in, a bass singer, Norman Triegel from the Met came in. And I heard them all up close, and it sounded kind of rough. But they sounded amazing from the distance. And so it kind of struck me, something must be going on here. And so Mr. Jacobs and I talked about that. And for me, I think it's the thing that stops most players from making that jump from student to professional player. And that is the understanding of what you have to sound like to you, which is very different than what we think it's going to be. And I'll talk about that in a second. we have to learn the sound we have to hear so the audience hears the sound that we want to hear. And so what do? If you're a student out there and your teacher has played for you in a lesson and you think, well, they're not warmed up, they don't sound very good, I have news for you. That's the sound you need to copy. Their sounds are quite rough up close. I know Bob Rusk talks about it being the rub from a string instrument.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of rosin on the bow, kind
Yeah.
of a huskiness to the quality
Yeah.
up close. Maybe a little less centered. Now you can think that's crazy, but the flute player we had today, exactly that. She had to play with a sound that she didn't like as much, and the audience thought it was so much better. Same thing with the violinist. He had to play with what he thought was a rather crunchy sound,
Yeah.
and then the audience loved it. And that was in a solo setting. Imagine an orchestra setting.
Yeah.
So I think it's learning that sound, and what happens is we all listen to our teachers at a distance, and we listen to recordings, so we have the final product as our sound in our head. But the problem is what we have to get to is our teacher and ask to sit close to them when they play. That's the sound we have to use so we can sound like our teachers in the audience. Mr. Jacobs sounded absolutely amazing in the orchestra.
Yeah.
And then I got the chance, obviously, to sit on stage with him playing Fantastique or Zarathustra, and I heard that crudeness in the playing that I'd heard originally. Now, by that point, it didn't sound crude. I knew what it was sounding like in the hall. But I think that's a big factor for a lot of students. You're always trying to play perfectly and beautifully up close, which means it's kind of thin and spread out in the audience. So it's a learning factor, and as you can come to grips with that, cope with that new sound, you'll find that all of a sudden people are telling you how much better you sound. So it's great. You can play badly and everybody tells you how good you sound, and when you try to play perfectly, they don't tell you that. So it makes it easier.
That's really like that stage makeup.
Absolutely. Stage makeup looks crude up close. It looks great from the audience. And remember, we're not playing for people right next to us. We're playing for the people way out in the audience.
I had a similar experience just listening to Jake up close in the studio the very first time. It was very shocking just how rough the sound was.
Mm-hmm.
And then having an experience later on, getting to sit behind him, behind the door of the backstage area, dressed right behind the low brass, just to hear that sound, and all of those sounds, Herseth, Christofoley, Clevenger, really just a amazing experience. And you got to do it for so many years.
Yeah. So I was very, very lucky. I'm really, really lucky.
Well, speaking of lucky, we've been very lucky to have you here with us for this week. It's not over yet, thankfully. We have one more day to enjoy you here, and we can't thank you enough for coming. Dave and I have known each other since I was a student at Northwestern. You had graduated a few years earlier, and we're in Chicago, having a very successful career freelancing and substituting and teaching in Chicago, and we met in 1981, I think, November or so of 1981. It's been a real pleasure to know you. And Puddles always is after me to make sure that I'm not rude, because I get so busy teaching, playing, interviewing, and he's like the anchor around my neck, and he reminds me that not to be rude. And so Puddles picked out. He knows that you like nuts. He's noticed that in our car rides, that you like unsalted peanuts. The closest thing we could come, though, were these genuine University of Oregon duck nuts. They're smoked. You don't smoke them.
Okay.
They're already smoked.
They're already smoked.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Puddles and I would like to say thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to have you as a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a teacher, and all-around good guy. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank Puddles and you for the nuts, and it's really been a great week. I've had a tremendous amount of fun, and obviously I wouldn't be here if you hadn't done a tremendous amount of background work to make this happen, and I can't thank you enough. It's been the teachers out here are very open, the students are very open, and I think that's what's made the week successful. That's half of the ingredients right there, is that real vibe that you have in the school here.
Yeah, I think it's a nice place.
It's a terrific place, and it was great to get out to Florence and be able to see the ocean. Because the last time I was here, it rained every day, and
And you
all
didn't
I
have
saw,
time.
All I saw was campus. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to see. All the places that Animal House was filmed at, and we got to eat at the cafeteria yesterday.
Food
And
fight? Yeah.
We tried to start a food fight. It didn't quite work, but
You got to see
anyhow.
Dean Wormer's office?
Yes. So this has been my pleasure. It truly has, and I can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you.
All right.
Back to you in the studio.